Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yay, perfect, thank you. I appreciate the feedback. I'm gonna try and move over so the camera will capture me. I'm trying to figure out how to get the camera to face me over here, but I'm failing miserably, as you can see. So I'm gonna scoot over towards the middle. And then that way, hopefully you'll be able to see me. So let's see. I can't see. Can you see me now? Yes. Okay, perfect. All right, well, I am going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and get the screen going. I'm going to keep my mask on because I've got a participant here in the room. Okay, so I'm going to move back over this way. And I want to welcome everybody to the Student Success Series workshop on reading to understand. I appreciate all the Zoom participants and participants here in the auditorium as well. Hopefully in the next 40, 45 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about some reading strategies that are going to be helpful as you navigate this semester. My name is Stacy Mason. I'm the Associate Director for Student Access and Accommodation. And I'm excited to get to present to you this evening. As we go through, I'm just going to kind of go through the slides, talk to you a little bit about some concepts, and then at the end, what we can do is if there's any questions, then I'm happy to answer them. So if everybody's ready, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So as you have probably noticed, there is a big difference in the expectation between reading for high school versus reading for college. Typically in high school, you're assigned a reading assignment, and it's a chapter, a page, not too much reading, and then the teacher typically goes through that information with you in class. That's a very different expectation in college. We'll talk about that in just a second. So, and usually when you're in class, in high school, the teacher's going to guide you and your classmates through a review of the reading, and then they're really the primary driver behind that. In college, reading is much different. I'm sure you've already realized that in the few weeks that you've been here. So you're expected to read much more, that's one. And then for each hour you spend in the classroom, typically you're expected to spend at least 2 or more hours outside the classroom doing other work to prepare for the course. So most of the time, that is typically reading. In college, most instructors do not spend much time reviewing that information in class. The expectation is that you're going to come into class prepared with the reading already completed, with a comprehending the reading and being able to discuss that information. This is why active reading is so important, and it's up to you to do the reading and the comprehension. Different types of college reading that you're going to encounter, which I'm sure at this point of the semester is not news to you. Textbooks, those are going to be really specific to the course content that you're studying. Articles, journal articles, news articles, or periodicals, newspapers, online articles, things like that. And then literature and nonfiction books. Faculty members use this type of literature to help you gain a different viewpoint, different perspectives, time periods, events, genres, just to, again, expound on the information that they're teaching you. There's always a purpose to the academic reading that your faculty member assigns to you. So if you ever question that this is busy work or it's not important, rest assured that your faculty member has made this decision because they feel it's important to the information that you need to glean from the course. There's always a benefit to academic reading. The information comes from reputable sources. So you're going to get information from experts, people that are knowledgeable in the field. It's going to help you learn how to form arguments. A lot of the assignments that you're going to have as you progress through your academic career is learning to critically think about topics and discussions. And so reading journal articles and peer-reviewed information helps you to develop and hone that skill. And then plus it also gets you an exposure to different viewpoints. One purpose of academic reading is to help you look at other people's perspectives and to help you to start to question and to really think about what your viewpoint is on certain subjects. And it helps you to either confirm what you already know or to start to bridge out with what your thoughts and your belief system are. I'm going to start with talking to you about some basic strategies for college reading. And this is just kind of something that will help you navigate some of this as you go through. I'm actually going to move, forgive me, I'm going to try and hide this so you can see the full screen. Okay. So the first thing I want you to think about is when you're starting to do your reading for your classes, to pace yourself. So as you sit down and look at your syllabi and you look at the reading that you have for each week, try to break it down into manageable parts. So if you've got 7 days between a class to do the reading, then break it down into typically we say about 5 sections, so you have the opportunity to read on it each day. If you've got 7 days, I wouldn't give yourself the full 7 days to read it in case something comes up and you're not able to get that done. Or if you're able to, take a break and go back and review. Just pace yourself, break it down into smaller chunks so it seems more manageable. Schedule your reading. So set aside blocks of time, preferably at the time of day when you are most alert and awake. You don't want to schedule your reading time late in the evening at the end of your day, just because you're going to be tired. And so you want to be as alert as possible. Get yourself in the right space. So choose to read in a quiet environment. Try to find some place that's comfortable, but not too comfortable. Some place that you're going to be able to focus that's got good lighting, but it's also going to allow you to reduce some distractions. Typically, I would recommend reading in your bed, in your dorm room, just because we associate that with a comfortable place where we sleep. And especially if, not that this ever happens, but if you were to get a textbook that is extremely dry or material that is extremely dry, then you want to be sure to be in a position where you can stay awake while reading it. I'm sure none of you have encountered any boring textbook sessions. So avoid distractions. Try to focus on the reading that you're doing. Try not to multitask when you're reading. As you're actively reading, that is using your short-term memory. So if you are listening to music, you're checking your phone constantly, things like that are going to distract you from what you're trying to do, and it's going to take your brain some time to reorient to back to the reading. And that's just going to add more time to your assignment. Avoid reading fatigue. If you can take a break about every 50 minutes or so, then take a break. Get up, move around, get a snack, do some stretches, something to kind of get your body going again. But really going over about 50 minutes is a lot to expect. And that's not a hard and fast time. You can always adjust based on what your needs are, but just try and be mindful of the fact that you're getting fatigued as you do. And then read your most difficult assignments early in your reading time when you're the freshest. If there is a lesson that you are just not extremely enthused about or it's not your favorite subject, then I would do that one first. Get it out of the way, because the harder it is to concentrate, the earlier you will be. Make your reading interesting. Part of some of the techniques that we're going to talk about in a little bit is how to connect to the information that you're reading. So if there's a way for you to kind of have a running dialogue in your head about the reading that you're doing, that's going to allow you to connect. So if you start to question or you're thinking about what the author is saying, think about questions or dialogue that you could possibly have with the author. Highlight your reading material, and we're going to talk a little bit about this a little bit later. But highlighting has its pros and cons. Typically, I would recommend reading through the chapter first and then going back and highlighting. I don't know about you, but sometimes if I highlight as I initially read through a text, I end up highlighting too much. And then I've got so much highlighted that I can't really focus on the main ideas, which is really what highlighting is supposed to do. So typically with highlighting, I would recommend going through the chapter and then going back and highlighting the main ideas. We try to recommend that you not highlight more than 15 to 25% of the text that you're reading, just because it starts to defeat the purpose if everything is highlighted. The highlighting is going to help you to go back and review it as you study. And then annotate your reading material. Annotating is taking notes in your books. I don't know about you, but when I was in high school about 1,000 years ago, nobody wanted you to write in your book, right? You didn't write it, they took them back. Things have a little bit changed, things have changed a lot now. So you purchase your textbook, you can write in it. If you don't want to write in your book, you can use sticky notes. But when you annotate, write full sentences, write down key concepts and things, and try to write it in your own words. Because when you go back to study and review for an exam, this is going to be what's going to help you to study and review. Because the last thing you're going to want to try and do as you review for an exam is to go back through and have to read all the text again. Your annotations, your highlights, things like that are going to be your study. As you're going through the reading, look up and keep track of some of the unfamiliar words that you don't know. Look them up in the dictionary, look them up online, because you don't want to continue to read through the information and not know the meaning of a word, because you can miss a lot of the context that you're needing to capture. And if you see phrases that are repeated throughout your reading, those are going to be the ones to highlight, because if something is being repeated over and over, that's something that is important. And then make flashcards. So if you're studying certain words for a test and you know that those certain phrases have been used over and over, you make yourself a flashcard. And then that way if you have a study group or you have a peer that you are studying with, that's going to allow you to go through and review that information quickly without having to go back through the book. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So the first method that I'm going to talk to you about is called the BCAs. And I'm not sure if anybody's going to heard this, but this information is going to sound familiar to you. This strategy, the next strategy that I'm going to talk about, they have some similarities. They differ a little bit. But the fundamental and the core information of this is going to be the same. So BCA stands for before reading, staying connected during reading, after reading studying, and after studying review. So the first thing we're going to talk about is setting some goals and before you read, looking at that information. So as you set your goals for your reading, you're going to start asking yourself what you're trying to learn. And as you preview the material, that's going to help you to kind of go through that. So you're going to want to set goals, preview your text, and then activate prior knowledge. So ask yourself, what do I know about this? Some of the information that you're studying right now might be something that's familiar to you from high school, or you've taken an AP course, or you just got some good working knowledge of that. Ask yourself what you know, and then ask yourself about where the gaps are in the knowledge. And then start to anticipate test questions. And that's going to be an important process because as you start to look at the information in the text, it's going to help you have a better idea of what the key elements are. So as you're previewing, what we recommend that you do is that you read the title and the introductory paragraph and section as you go through. So those key headings, those highlighted in bold terms, are going to be things to help you to start to get some context as to what you're reading. Read the headings and subheadings. Look over any charts, graphs, diagrams, or pictures. Start noting any unfamiliar terms, because that's, again, going to start to help you connect to the material that you're reading. I wouldn't highlight it. I would just go through and kind of acknowledge those key terms and points. Part of that previewing is going to be reading a summary at the end of the chapter if there is one. That's, again, going to orient you to the information that you're reading. And then it's going to help you with some of those context clues. And then if there's any questions or problems at the end of the chapter, read those as well. That's going to help you to have a better understanding of the material that you're about to read. And then stop and reflect before reading the entire chapter. Just pause, think about the material that you've seen so far before you jump into the actual reading. As you're starting to read and look at this information, those bold headings that you see, those subheadings, that's going to help you kind of start to formulate those test questions that you think your professors and your teachers are going to start asking you. Because if the text that you're reading is highlighting that information, more than likely it's important information for you. Go beyond adding what to the headings to structure a question. So if it's, what is cell mutation, or, what is, whatever the heading might be. Try to dig a little deeper about why something is important. kind of formulate those questions on more than a superficial level. And then write these questions on the margins or on your notes. So kind of a way to formulate some of those test questions. If one of the headings is encoding, then you can start to formulate what those questions might look like. So what is encoding? Why is encoding important in the learning process? Why did civil rights, So why is encoding important in the learning process? So that's going to help you start to formulate those questions. And then if another bold heading was civil rights and identities, it's going to start to, again, trigger that thought process. Why did the civil rights become an important issue for the Kennedys? And what did the Kennedys do for civil rights? The next question is staying connected during your reading. So the steps in that are going to be evaluate, expand and apply, and then be selected and annotate. So if you want to recap, you're doing a lot of before reading work, a lot of legwork, right? And now you're getting into how to stay connected. So while you're reading, evaluate whether you agree or disagree with the author and why. Again, another means to stay connected with what you're reading. Start to examine your own beliefs about those materials. Sometimes in reading those things, it's going to help you either confirm what you know or start to re-examine what you thought you might have known about the subject. And then that helps you to form an opinion and develop a reaction to the text, which again helps you to connect to that information. Reading to expand and apply. So while you're reading, you might want to expand upon the ideas that the author is presenting. Start thinking about them in terms that make sense to you. And then how they apply to you. You always want to try and bring the material back to something that's important to you and something that's going to be relevant to what you're doing. And then by standing upon and applying the presented ideas, you want to make the material more relevant to you and your own. Again, you're here for a purpose, right? The reading is just not busy work. It's to help you prepare those foundations that you need to keep moving forward. And then be selective. As you're going through it, this is when you're going to start to differentiate between main ideas and secondary ideas, right? You're going to start going through and grabbing those context clues. So decipher between primary details and secondary details. Extract important details. Ask yourself those questions again. Who, what, where, why. And then pick up cues from what your professor says in class. If things start to click, you've heard this before, this is something that your faculty member has mentioned, and that helps you to know that you're on the right track. And then monitor and reflect on your own learning through background knowledge so that you can judge how much supporting information you're going to need. And then annotate. I'm sure you've heard what annotate means. It's to make notes and to put some type of comment. So don't just read and highlight, right? Because you're not gathering that information, it's not meaningful to you. So write down information if you want to use sticky notes, or if you want to, you actually write in your book or you have a note page, use something to write the information. Because the good thing about these annotations is that you're going to be able to use those when you're studying and reviewing your tests. And then make sure that you put the information in your own words. It doesn't help for you to go through and just write verbatim what the authors already said. Write it down in a language that's meaningful to you. And then summarize, like I said, the sections in your own words. And then again, for annotating, highlight that key information, very specific terms and concepts. You want to make sure that what you're writing is relevant to what you're reading. Names, dates, events, lists or characteristics, cause and effects, likenesses, and differences, things like that. These are some just examples of annotation. This person has used sticky notes. I have a preference for sticky notes. It's my favorite means of things, but sometimes it gets a little out of control. But write down those statements and those facts that you know are true. When you go back to study, you're going to study your notes. You're not going to go back and reread the text because you really don't have time. I mean, you can if you need to, but we recommend using your notes in annotations. And highlight and underline them like we talked about. And then after reading, studying and reviewing. So you're going to want to try and associate the information with what you've learned. Kind of visualize the information, the concepts, concentrate, repeat it, reread through your annotations, and then refer back to the text only if you need more information or if you feel like there's gaps. Okay? So that's the first technique that I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to hop over to the computer and see if anybody has any questions at this point. Does anybody have any questions? You want to put them into chat? Is everybody just dumbstruck on how great the information is? Yeah, that's all I have. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. So the next technique that I'm going to talk to you about is the SQ3R. And what you'll notice is that this information overlaps with the information that you heard in the BCA. But the good thing is, with these different types of techniques and skills, you can pull from them whatever works for you. There's not one set way to do this. So take a little bit from this strategy, take a little bit from the next strategy, and use it as you need it, okay? So SP3R is a reading comprehension method made for 5 steps. So survey, question, read, recite, and review. Let me see, it's not letting me move my slide forward. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Okay. So, like I mentioned previously, SQ3R stands for survey, question, read, recite, and review. It's a proven technique that's helped you sharpen your technical skills. So, as you have learned very quickly in this semester, you're assigned multiple readings, lots of content to get through. So this is a way to help your reading be more meaningful so you can use your time more effectively. And then I'm going to talk about how the strategy works. So the first thing is survey. So survey kind of goes back to like we said with the BCA with the previous side of things. So what you're going to do is you're going to read through some of the main ideas and the highlights of the text. So you're going to look at the title, introduction, summary, the chapter's first paragraph. Again, this is going to help you orient yourself to the reading, right? And then you're going to go through each boldface heading and subheading. That's going to help you to create a mental structure to the topic as well. And then look at all the graphics, look at the captions closely. They're there to emphasize certain points of the reading. And there's lots of good material in that, so don't skip through. And then check for reading aids, any type of footnotes, emphasize text like italics, bold. Those are typically put in there to capture your attention, right? So don't skip. The next step in this process is going to be to question. So during this stage, you should note any questions on the subjects that are contained in the document. So go through and start writing those questions down. And try and write those questions down in your own words, in something that's going to be meaningful to you. Usually these questions can be found in the learning objectives in the back of the chapter. So, and they're always there for a reason. It's going to orient you to the main ideas of the topic. And then these questions are going to be your study goals. This is what you're going to use down the road. So the other side of using a method like this is there's a purpose behind the reading, right? It's not just reading for busy work or just to, just go through this massive amount of text. You can take it back and use it when you study. So as you survey the text, ask a question for each section. Go back to those inquisitive starts, right? So what, why, how, when, who, those types of questions are going to help you to formulate what you need to know. And then rewrite the questions of the chapter in your own words. And then make sure when you answer those questions that you answer them in your own words as well, because that's going to give it more meaningful context to you. Obviously, the next step in this process is going to be to read, right? Hopefully it didn't seem like I skipped that and didn't see it. So read one section of a chapter at a time, actively looking for the answers to those questions that you have read previously. Read each section thoroughly. Always keep those questions in your mind. Look at those questions on the paper that you've written. And then try to find the answers and identify if you need to have additional questions. If something keeps coming up over and over, then give yourself pause and go back to it. And then pay attention to bold and italicized text that authors use. they're there for a reason, right? It's going to help give you some context as to what's important. And then be sure to review again all of those things that you had skimmed over previously in something. So the tables, the graphs, any illustrations, they're there to give you a lot more information. So the next step is of the 3 R's is recall and recite. So with this, you're going to go back through every section that you have read, and you're going to recall the information and go back and look at it. Jotting down a few sentences or a short paragraph capturing the main ideas is going to be important. Because what it's going to help you to realize is whether or not you've got the information. If you don't have it, don't move on to the next chapter. Stay in that chapter until you feel like you have a good grasp of that information. Because the information is going to build from chapter to chapter. So if you don't have one concept, it's definitely not going to roll over to the next one. Repeat the question, read and recite steps for each section of the chapter and assign a reading. Always ask the question, read through, and then go back and recite the answer to yourself. It's going to help you again to better comprehend the information. And then the last step is to pretend you're responsible for teaching this section. And could you do it? Could you sit down with somebody and explain this concept in language and in a means that they would understand, and in a means that you would understand? And if you can't, then go back through that chapter. Review. So reviewing all the collected information is the final step of this process. So in this stage, you review your collected information. You go through any particular chapter, you look at your notes, you go back and review your summary, your notes. That's again going to help to solidify that information for you. And then always go back and review your notes. Even once the reading is done, as you're building for the next chapter and the next reading, go back and review. And that's going to help to solidify that information. Reviewing your study notes every week to help you remember the information. And that's the basics of the SQ technique. Things to remember, not every strategy is going to work for everyone, right? So what you need to do is shop around. Grab different bits and pieces from some of these strategies and see what's going to work for you and develop a strategy built on these principles, but it's specific to what your needs are. Find out what works for you, find out what doesn't, try and use one of these strategies, and then the parts that you really identify with that you feel like are helpful to you, latch onto those and continue to use them. And then really just remember that you need to do more than just highlighting them, right? Highlighting is not going to help you comprehend and retain that information. These are some of the sources that I got the information from. They all have access to this PowerPoint. And so really at this point, I'm going to open the floor up to questions and see if there's any specific information that's coming. I'm going to come over to it and see. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, so one of the questions is, what should I do if I have rented the book? So what you could do, instead of going through and highlighting through the books, is the key information that you would go through and highlight. If you remember, it's not all these just, full pages of highlight. It's about 15 to 25%. So what you could do is you could keep another notebook, spiral of some sort, or a document, to where you go through and write out that key information. And then that way, you're not having to highlight in the book, but you're still identifying those main ideas and those headings that you need to reference back to. And then somebody asked if we're able to email slides. I'm sure Student Development Services can make this PowerPoint available to you. That's one of the reasons why there's so much text on there. And then, so you can go back and reference it. And then how can you have an opinion about what all they're saying if it's just factual information without opinions? So you're right. So sometimes if the textbook is not geared toward opinion-based dialogue, it's just facts, then it's going to be hard to have an opinion about. But I still think in part of that process, you can go through and look at the content and that information and expand upon some questions. So hopefully that information is going to trigger some thoughts, right? And so as you're reading even factual content, there's going to be questions that you have. So writing that down is going to help you to better connect with that information. Is there any other questions? Okay, so I think one of the questions was, what would you recommend if there's multiple readings for an assignment? So typically, if you are having more than one reading, hopefully it's been assigned out, so you can sit down and kind of break it down into more manageable parts. So if you know that you have a journal article to read, and you've got text to read, and you've got something else to read, whatever it might be that the professor has assigned, then I would still go through each one of those assignments and look at how long it is, and then break it down into more manageable chunks. So if you feel like you do better with your focus on one mode of reading, whether it be the textbook or the journal article, then focus on that one first. But then you're going to have wanted built into your schedule time to read all of them. But sometimes I think it's easier to focus on just the one element that you're reading before you go on to the next. But sometimes if you find that the material works together, then you could break it down into more manageable parts. One more time. Okay, I think that might have been the last question. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and end our presentation. I just wanted to remind you that next week, the workshop is going to be about managing your stress before it manages you. So I'd highly recommend, attending this workshop. I'm sure as the semester continues, our stress is going to keep going up. So we want to make sure that you have techniques to be able to better manage that. So I appreciate everybody's participation here and everybody's participation on Zoom. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Y'all have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh no, it's just a Zoom call.
Thank you. Real.
Once